Hey, so this new channel is going to be for the purpose of communicating and having like video-based commentary on the videos that I've done in the Mormon Truth video library on the Dodger Game channel. The LDS Church has covered up the truth for long enough, and like this guy coming out of being covered up at lowers, he's going to see the light, which is what you're going to do when you watch these. So here's a few of the videos, and that's about enough for an introduction now. See you in the channel. Sarah, so I'm doing a video correspondence here with you. I'm not mighty in writing. Something I have in common with Moroni, right? Or Mormon, or whoever made those excuses in the Book of Mormon for knowing that they were going to screw up when editing came someday. Anyway, yeah, it's a lot easier for me to talk than it is for me to try to punctuate and all that sort of thing, clear up texting, predictive texting errors. So I'm not so sure about links to something different, but perhaps the way I looked at things or saw things that may have been part of the same material you've looked at in some cases, like in the Gospel Topics essays. So, my take is that the church really tries to avoid responsibility whenever possible. A good example of that would have been how the apologetics have been handled for so many years. They had Hugh Nibley there at BYU that Dan Peterson wanted to follow in his footsteps and get paid for, be a hitman, basically. Do character assassination on anybody who was uncovering the church's covered up history. So they created farms down there at BYU. And so, it's church owned, it's church affiliated, but in the end, if Peterson and company screw up, the apostles could always say, well, that's just, an employee at BYU. It's a professor. He wasn't even a professor, was he? Peterson. So, they kind of had, I don't know if you want to call that an arm's length deal, but it's, they didn't have to take responsibility. They didn't get into we caught Jesus lying here, Kind of like when Spencer Kimball was being asked all those questions by Steve Benson via Grandpa Benson, carrying the letters back and forth about when Steve wanted to know, why do we have evolution classes teaching, organic evolution here at BYU, and then I go to my religion class and they say it's all baloney. So what's the deal here? Because it says that Adam, was the first flesh upon the earth, the first man also, and then it also says that death entered the world after the fall. So kind of put President Kimball on the spot. He had to take a stand, and he just avoided it completely. He'd say, "Did you read this? Did you read that?" And he's like, "Dude, you're the prophet. Yeah, I've read that. That's why I'm asking you." So that whole thing seems to be a theme that's continued. And so now they brought the apologetics. They've got Fair over there doing their dirty work for them, and Peterson's over there finally. And now they've got apologetic stuff that they don't call apologetics on the Gospel Topics essays. As you've probably read, or if you watch some of my videos on like the DNA and the race and the priesthood ones, I got a little intro there, a portion where I'm looking at their preface to it. And they specifically state things like, due to the fact that there's so much on the internet that's, unreliable and inaccurate, so they immediately create distrust in any other place. We've decided to gather information here because we want everybody to know about important topics. We want our people to be really well educated on church history. That's why we hide it in here and don't say anything about it on the front, on the homepage, right? For the last 4 years. And they say, so we made these straightforward, in-depth essays. And before all that, they cite Doctrine and Covenants section 88 and say that study by, gain knowledge and wisdom by study and also by faith. And then they interpret that to say that God doesn't want you to just have one set of opinions. Okay, so we really should expect this to be a straightforward and balanced essay, not polemics, not a one-sided thing that ignores, anything that doesn't go along with a particular theme that they're going with. And so when you talk about your perception maybe that they haven't disavowed, well, have they or haven't they? Because they also state that these things are approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. They were pretending that they're not apologetics, but that they're a straightforward essay, which they are not. And so in that race and priesthood, I'm kind of thinking that maybe, because of the title being race and priesthood, that and in your video you said, well, that's just about the African Negroes, and it's not just about the African Negroes and everything that they say, the way I see it, because they make statements about race, not just about priesthood. So at the opening of that whole deal, they say they do this PC pitch, how PC the church is. They're trying to say, you can have it like a Chinese visiting teacher with a Caucasian or whatever, or a black bishop in a white area, ward or something like that. But they say God has created all of His children of the various races and ethnicities. I'm not looking at it, by the way, so I may not quote this perfectly. And He esteems them all equally, which is complete contradiction to Scripture. And they further state, then they go to the Book of Mormon and take a few words there where it says, all are like unto God, black and white, bond and free, whatever. And they just leave it at that. So that's the most PC thing they can find in the entire Book of Mormon, is about 5 words there, as far as the racial issue goes. So they've gone ahead and stated that God has created all the children equally, and He esteems them all equally, or words to those effect. Right there. So that, and then they further state, when they do all that disavowing, I believe that's where they say it. Probably I should have been looking at this when I said it, but they say that dark skin or skin of blackness is not a sign of divine disfavor or a curse, which happen to be words. The word curse is used, as you know, in 2 Nephi chapter 5, okay, and probably in like Alma chapter 3, where it's talking specifically about God cursing the Lamanites with a skin of blackness. So they blatantly said a skin of blackness is not a curse or a sign of divine disfavor, or said that backwards. Okay, they didn't say of the African race, they said period. Furthermore, they stayed in there, God doesn't hold, when they say we disavow all racism and all that sort of thing, past and present, they also state that the black or any other race is not inferior to any other race. So, I mean, they're including all races in this. This is the way I see it. I mean, they've made statements that include all races. All races, none are superior. God has created all of them and loves them all equally and esteems them all equally, and nobody's better than anybody else. So that's not just about Negroes. It's about everybody, and it's saying, blatantly states, we disavow the theories that a skin of blackness was a sign of divine disfavor or curse. So that includes all dark skin. So they don't like to mention the Lamanites. They don't like to mention anything that gets them in trouble. They didn't. They said they call these things theories regarding, anyone of African descent. I don't call them African Americans because people of African descent are in probably 100 countries. Everybody's so America centric here. We get these phrases in the PC content. I mean, they don't call them African Americans in Panama. So anyway, it's not just about them. They've made blanket statements, and then they call them theories, but they weren't theories. The book of Abraham specifically says the Canaanites are cursed and can't have the priesthood. The book of Moses specifically says that they got turned black. The Canaanites got turned black. And the hyperlink was there if you're looking at stuff, before the 2013 scriptures, where you still got hyperlinks. So they're denying the scriptures. They're lying. They ignore them. They specifically say the Canaanites can't have the priesthood. They specifically state that it's not a sign of divine disfavor or curse, when the Book of Mormon says that it is a curse, specifically, and a mark, it says in Alma chapter 3. And then you can link Mark to Mark of Cain, so it's always like that. And so they don't like to mention that, just like with the Lamanites. And so they ignore the scriptures about the Lamanites being cursed there. They ignore the priesthood curse, that the Canaanites could not have the priesthood, and they blame it on Brigham Young, when Joseph Smith wrote those scriptures, and it blatantly says that. And like I've said, he gives those. He did that at the same time he became a Freemason. In a white rite, so obviously the blacks couldn't come into the temple and learn the signs and tokens that were for the York rite. So they always try to avoid all that because they want to avoid all connections with Freemasonry, it seems. They don't want you to look at that, so they blow out a decoy, just like they don't want you to look at the spiritual wife system, so they focus on saying Joseph Smith married these women, which he did not. So, yeah, they did start with that sealing doctrine at the end, but that's ridiculous. So they use false flags to keep us away from the real issues that they are even more uncomfortable with. And just like you said, it would destroy the Book of Mormon. Well, it destroys the Book of Moses and it destroys the Book of Abraham too, but they just ignore that. Just like they ignore the scriptures about the Lamanites being cursed with a skin of blackness. So, they disavowed that. They disavowed that the Lamanites were the only people here in the Americas in order to try to save their DNA claim, when the Book of Mormon definitely says that that's the case. And Jeffrey Holland, said that was the case in his June 1976 Ensign article, The Land of Promise, or The Promised Land. He says the land was washed clean with the flood of Noah, which obviously never happened. And that then the continents were separated, the water rushed around to protect this land, this promised land, so nobody would get there unless God brought them there. But you've got tons of scripture in there, which I've kind of put in some of those ones. And so they justify the whole DNA, they justify the whole, it's not just the blacks and the priesthood, it's the doctrine that's taught in the patriarchal blessings right now still. Being, you were valiant in the premortal existence, and that's why you get to be in the tribe of Ephraim or something, right? And that's when, those statements like Marky Peterson said, well, they were less valiant, so they were Chinese. They're completely not valiant, so they were black. So it's by degrees. And if you were the most valiant, then, you were born into Hiram Smith's line in the church or something, right? And then it's all by degrees. So anyway, yeah, they've tried to disavow anything they can with regard to race, and you did a great job uncovering that stuff, that they still are teaching the same stuff, but they have to. Okay, so I'm in Genesis chapter 9, and I got the cursed be Canaan thing here, servant of servants shall he be. But look, LDS.org now doesn't show the hyperlinks. This is the same device I've been using that had the hyperlinks. Servant would go to the Joseph Smith translation, which would say that he was covered in a veil of darkness, that all men would know him. But they've gotten rid of the hyperlinks, so you can't see where they linked, like from Abraham chapter 1 saying the Canaanites were cursed, couldn't have the priesthood, to Moses chapter 7 where it said that they became black, that all men would despise them, and so forth. So they've taken out the links. They put like the 2013 version mandatory on here or something, so I'm getting this 2013 version is what it must be, so I can't see the links, which make it easier to see what they used to be showing us and now we're trying to hide. All of Mormon history. Well, anyway, I rambled probably too much. Another thing you mentioned about your interview with John Dehlin, how you said you over-prepared and you were nervous. Well, see, that'll be a nice thing when you start doing your own stuff, videos and stuff, because you'll be able to use editing software and you won't have to be all on the spot like a live broadcast that John was doing in that case. So I think that you'll do really well with that. You'll be able to share a lot of things and not have to be nervous, because you can always go back and edit it out. Anyway, you did a super job, and nothing but praise.